If you want to understand WWII composting, you have to forget hobby gardening and think in terms of national survival. During the war, fertilizer factories were diverted to explosives, fuel was rationed, livestock numbers collapsed, and soil exhaustion became a strategic problem. Governments didn't ask whether compost was organic or fashionable. They asked one question: does it grow food fast, reliably, and everywhere? The answer, proven again and again, was yes. That's why ministries of agriculture issued compost manuals, trained instructors, and treated soil as infrastructure. The secrets weren't mystical. They were disciplined, repeatable systems refined under pressure. How WWII's experts built compost for speed rather than perfection. Modern compost advice often obsesses over ideal ratios and long timelines. Wartime composting did not. Speed mattered more than elegance. Farmers layered materials aggressively, knowing crops could not wait a year. Green matter, such as kitchen scraps, weeds and manure, was paired immediately with carbon sources like straw, shredded paper or dried leaves. Piles were built large, often chest-high, because volume meant heat, and heat meant pathogens destroyed and nutrients unlocked quickly. You can apply this today by building fewer, larger piles rather than many small ones, and by prioritizing mass over neatness. Why layering was done deliberately and never randomly. WWII's manuals stressed structured layering, not dumping. Nitrogen-rich material went down first to jumpstart microbial activity. Carbon followed to trap nitrogen gases and prevent loss. Soil or finished compost was added between layers as an inoculant, introducing bacteria and fungi that accelerated breakdown. This wasn't guesswork. Farmers observed that piles without soil stayed cold and stalled. Today, simply adding a few shovels of garden soil, every foot of material, can cut composting time dramatically. How moisture control was treated like fuel management. Too dry and compost died. Too wet and it rotted. Wartime compost guides compared moisture to a wrung-out cloth, damp but never dripping. Water was added deliberately, often warmed if possible, because cold water slowed microbial action. Piles were covered with burlap sacks or soil caps to prevent evaporation and protect from rain. If you want to apply this now, stop leaving piles exposed. A simple cover can double microbial efficiency and prevent nutrient loss. You know, turning compost wasn't just some casual chore, it was absolutely scheduled, not optional. It was done on a proper timetable, not whenever someone fancied it. Early turning, well, that introduced oxygen right when the heat was at its peak. Later on, turning helped move the outer material into the centre, making sure everything broke down evenly. Now, wartime experts, they didn't rely on thermometers or gadgets. They knew exactly when to turn the pile just by feel and smell. If you caught a sharp ammonia scent, that meant nitrogen was being lost, so you had to turn immediately and add more carbon. These days, you can do much the same by checking your pile every week and paying attention to the smell and warmth, rather than just sticking to a calendar. During the war, food waste was treated as a strategic material, not rubbish. Nothing edible went to waste, honestly, not even scraps. Peels, bones and even grease were composted with care. Grease, for instance, was always mixed with something absorbent and carbon-rich to keep it from creating those nasty anaerobic pockets. Bones, well, they were crushed or sometimes charred first. The guiding principle was simple. Any nutrients that left the kitchen had to return to the soil. These days, most folks just toss out mineral-rich scraps that WWII's farmers knew were absolutely critical. If you save and compost them, you're helping to close that loop once again. When fuel was rationed, human labour took the place of machines, and honestly, that produced better soil in the end. Composting became a manual task out of necessity, but that was actually an advantage. Hand-built piles were watched closely, so any problems could be fixed right away. Farmers got to know their soil intimately, really. This hands-on approach meant the compost was tailored to local conditions, not just some generic fertilizer. If you want better soil, you really ought to handle it more. There's a lot your hands can tell you that spreadsheets simply can't. You know, compost teas were actually used long before anyone even thought to give them a proper name. Back during the war, liquid extracts from compost were just a common sight in gardens. Folks would soak finished compost in water, and this would create these really nutrient-rich solutions, perfect for jump-starting seedlings or reviving crops that were looking a bit worse for wear. These teas, well, they weren't aerated or sold as some fancy product. They were just practical, plain and simple. All it took was a shovel of compost, a bucket of water, and a bit of patience. And honestly, applying this method today is still straightforward and incredibly effective, especially when you're looking to give early season growth a real boost. Now, let's talk about weeds. Back then, weeds weren't something to be feared or cursed. They weren't enemies at all. In fact, they were seen as nutrient collectors. Those deep-rooted weeds would pull up minerals from way down in the soil, and when you cut them before they went to seed, you could return all those nutrients to your compost heap. WWII farmers, well, they timed their weed collection carefully to avoid spreading seeds, but made sure to harvest all those valuable nutrients. If you compost weeds while they're still young and keep the heap hot, you're actually recycling minerals that modern soils are, quite frankly, desperate for. Now, let's talk about how ash and char were used to balance soil chemistry. Wood ash and charred material, you see, were added sparingly to compost piles to supply potassium and raise pH in acidic soils. This was especially common in colder regions where wood was abundant. When applied carefully, it improved root development and disease resistance. You can still do this today by adding small amounts of cooled ash to active piles, just never directly to plants. Why was compost maturity judged by plants, not by time? Well, finished compost was defined by smell, texture and plant response, not by the number of months passed. If seedlings thrived, the compost was ready. If they stalled, it needed more time. This plant-centered evaluation kept soil responsive rather than just theoretical. Testing compost with fast-growing greens, honestly, remains one of the best ways to judge readiness. So, how do these WWII compost systems still outperform modern shortcuts? The real lesson of WWII composting isn't about nostalgia, it's about resilience. These systems worked when fuel, chemicals and machinery failed, and, they still work now. By building large piles, layering deliberately, controlling moisture, turning with purpose, and returning every scrap to the soil, you recreate a system that, well, fed nations under siege. If you value the kind of knowledge that kept people alive when supply chains collapsed, this is worth preserving. Subscribe to the channel for more WWII-era survival systems that still outperform modern solutions, and share this with anyone who believes good soil is the foundation of real independence.